Hi everyone, my name's Alistair Ben and you're watching Expressive Photography. In today's video, I want to tackle the subject of simplicity. Now that should be simpler than it sounds, right? You know, go out into the landscape and make simple photographs. But first of all, I want to look at why would we want simplicity in our photography? There are so many reasons. First and foremost, it makes it easier for viewers to kind of get the gist of what the photograph is about. The landscape is a busy and complex place, and not everywhere you're going to go is going to lend itself to making simple photographs, or is it? Secondly, I think it's really important in busy lives that we take time to find simplicity in it. We're being bombarded 365 days a year with news and stress and outside influences and things that make demands on our time that we can't spend it the way we would like to. And coming out into the landscape with a camera, especially somewhere as beautiful as here on the Isle of Lewis, is a really good way to find simplicity in our lives. So in today's video, I want to take this, my trusted GFX 100 Mark II, my case filters and my tripod, and I'm going to go out into this pretty busy landscape and I'm going to show you my tips and tricks to how to find simple, effective, evocative photographs even on a blue sky day when it's kind of stormy. So join me in the landscape and hopefully this is going to be of value to you. If so, please hit the subscribe button, dive into the comments, give me a thumbs up, and generally give the video a lot of love because that's what helps us grow this YouTube channel. Let's have a look at the images that I made out there in the field. And if we look at the overall scene, there's something about it that does attract me. You know, the angle of the coast, the intricacy of the way the rocks and the water are joining. You know, there are things in this landscape that I find really, really appealing. Now, obviously, the time of day, the height of the tide, the quality of the light, all of these things are going to come into consideration. But using this as an example, we can look at a scene that many people would consider to be quite ordinary and see what we can do with it by going through a process of simplification. Now with the Fuji GFX 100 Mark II, I shoot in 4:3 is the native aspect ratio. So what I've done here is I've started with a 4:3 composition, and this is pretty much point and shoot. There is nothing complex about this. This is just literally pointing my camera at a section of coast that I think, yeah, that there's some potential here. And I don't think anybody would get horribly excited with this. And if we start to understand why that might be, it's all a bit flat, the colors aren't very exciting, it's very middle of the day, the water's quite busy, you know, there's an awful lot of ordinariness about it. So let's not get carried away and let's not forget that the landscape is full of really cool stuff to find, but we need to work at it. And this is the skill of landscape photography, is to see something and recognize the potential that exists in it. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove content. Now, the easiest way to do that in camera is to crop a different aspect ratio. So I'm going to move from 4:3, and in the second frame here, this is now a 16:9. So instantly, this scene seems to be a little bit less ordinary and a little bit more interesting. Now, why is that? Well, partially 16:9 is a panoramic aspect ratio. It's something that's going to make the landscape feel more expansive. It's also not ordinary. 3:2, 4:3, they're the ones that we recognize as normal photographs. and going to 16:9, instantly the scene looks a little bit more interesting. We're also filling more of the frame with the interesting content. If we go back here, this is the first 4:3 version. As soon as we move to 16:9, we're somehow filling the frame with more content. There are still some problems that exist here. The water is still quite ordinary. There's quite a lot of chaos there, but there's enough luminosity in that surf, I think, to get a hint at where the interesting areas are in the frame to look at. So we can look in this as tip 1 for simplifying, which is use a different aspect ratio, which is ultimately removing content. If we expand on that and go to the X-Pan panoramic ratio, which is native to the GFX series of cameras, I can make this image even more not normal, extraordinary, I suppose. Haven't changed anything yet, haven't mucked around with shutter speeds or anything, but by going into that aspect, that panoramic aspect ratio, we are removing even more content, filling the frame with even more of the content that we would consider to be photographically interesting. Now, step number 2 or tip number 2 is when the colors aren't adding to the scene, going black and white can instantly simplify things. So if we look at the next step, going into a monochromatic color space in camera. So what I've done here, this is straight out of camera. I haven't made any adjustments at all. So I've gone back to a 16:9 aspect ratio, and I've converted it into a black and white preset on the Fujifilm GFX 100 Mark II. This has a red or a yellow filter on it, so it's changing the way the colors are moving around a little bit. It's darkened the ocean, it's made more contrast between the water and the rest of, the surf and the rest of the water, created a much more contrasty scene. I want to stress these are unworked files, so I would be able to bring out more shadow detail, change the dynamic range a little bit, maybe brighten up parts of the sky. But I want to work with unprocessed files here to show the tips that I think are important to simplifying your photographs. So far, just to recap on those tips, we have to use a different aspect ratio from full frame down to 16:9 or squares or whatever, but some way of reducing the amount of content in the frame. The second is to go to a black and white preview. That is instantly going to make this not a normal view. My third tip is to start manipulating time. Now, I've been using the case filter system for about 5 years now, and what I did here was I put on a combined 6-stop and CPL, and I've moved the shutter speed down now, and I think just from memory it's about 1.5 seconds, something like that. I'll put the numbers up on the screen for you to be certain of that. By moving the shutter speed from what it was before, again, I can't remember, but moving the shutter speed slower has taken some of the energy out of the water and is starting to show directionality. We start to get that feeling that the ocean is a moving thing. When we use faster shutter speeds, there's always that very energetic feel, but it also adds clutter, it adds contrast, it adds detail, it adds texture. And in my mind here, this photograph is very much about the rocks and their relationship with the water. The angularity, the shapes, the patterns, the jaggedness, the ruggedness of this coast. By slowing down the shutter speed, I'm able to distract the viewer's attention from all of the clutter in the water, and it becomes a much more compatible relationship. So this is with a 6-stop and a circular polarizer combined filter. And then I decided, okay, well, what happens if I simplify this even more? So this is using a 10-stop ND filter, again, a case 10-stop ND filter. And this has had a huge impact on simplifying the scene. We no longer have chaos or choppiness in the water. And some might say, well, this is a very old, tired and trite photographic method, long exposure, black and white. But it is for a reason. It simplifies the idea that this was taken at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in normal light disappears from our mind because there's no timestamp, there's no time of day. This could have just as easily been taken in golden hour with the contrast and the light that's showing itself here. We're not getting that time of day color clue. We've slowed it down, we've made it black and white. And personally, I like this type of stuff. I think it really emphasizes that relationship between the jagged rocks and the smooth water. Now, the next stage, of course, is to zoom in. And instantly, we've created a very, very intimate view of this coast. This becomes much more anonymous. We're not getting all of those signals. We have no idea about the time of day. This is a much more expressive photograph. This is a photograph of me rather than me photographing a landscape. I think these are much more personal and they're much more appealing to people. Scenes like this are present around the whole coast of the world, whether you're in Scotland or anywhere else in the British Isles or the west coast of the United States. There are things that you can point your camera on any coast in the world. And if you don't live in the coast, there are other things that we can do in forests and any other form of environment to follow these principles, to simplify the landscape, to strip it down into its constituent parts. And this is a far more intimate scene. So once I'd found this arrangement, and honestly, this is what I saw when I walked up to the headland. I just had to go through the process to show how I would get there. Using different shutter speeds, again, longer shutter speeds, the water changes. You get sets of waves coming through. Some of them are more energetic, some of them are a little bit more passive, and trying different things. This was very windy when I was making these photographs, and I wanted to make sure I was getting sharp photos. I was shielding the camera, I was holding my jacket up to try and block the wind from getting to the camera, and of course using a very sturdy tripod with long spikes that I could stick into the turf to make sure it was nice and solid. So I really like this scene. I think it's super. I'm very happy with it. And if we think about simplification, this is the ultimate distillation of that first scene that we were looking at. I did try some different aspect ratios here. This is a square, so a 1:1 aspect ratio. I brightened up the water in this one and opened up the shadows a little bit, so it's not as gloomy as the previous version, and that also changes the feel. We are using tonality to simplify, brightening things up, making it less heavy looking. This is a darker, more intimidating scene, and obviously the distribution of shadows and light in this composition are quite different from this one. This is more about the ocean, this is more about the rocks. So how we manage space within the frame is an excellent way to simplify also. And I ended up going with a final couple of photographs here. This is a 16:9 vertical, which is quite an unusual aspect ratio. You don't see many people photographing 16:9s in a vertical aspect ratio. They look incredibly tall in comparison to a 16:9 horizontal. It is crazy how this works. Our brains don't compute that this is the same aspect ratio. I really like this one. This reminds me more of a kind of a Japanese wall hanging type of aspect ratio. It's much more like a panel. And the final photograph is this one, which is a very simple, I find this one probably the most calming of all the scenes that I took. Very simple, very zen-like. So it should be very obvious that by going through different aspect ratios, by zooming in, by managing time or changing from a color to a black and white color space, that we've gone from a landscape that superficially is incredibly ordinary, incredibly mundane at a time of day that most people wouldn't consider to be conducive to landscape photography. And honestly, I'm pretty pleased with this. That is a photograph I'd be quite proud to say, yeah, it's one of mine. And it was just a process of elimination by saying, right, how can I simplify this scene? How can I remove color? How can I remove distractions of water? How can I remove distracting content to simplify this landscape down to its absolute bare bones? And that is what simplification is. It's compositional simplification. It's removing contrast. It's removing clutter and detail. I hope you have found this to be of value to you. If so, I would be delighted if you would click the subscribe button, dive into the comments. Has this been useful to you? Are these tips of value? I do hope so. As per normal, click in the link below to check out the Case filters. Like I said, I'm an ambassador for Case and have been using them for many years. They have never let me down. They are bomb-proof. They have no color casts. They are wonderful filters. So please click on the link below and use the code Alistair for a 5% discount. And finally, click on our website and check out any of our ebook education material where I talk about many of these things in greater detail. Thanks for watching. Join me again next week for more photographic expressive fun. Bye for now.